happiness is the most pleasurable emotion, but
Okay.
that might not be the emotion that we want to feel at all times.
Just a formal introduction because हम कभी ऐसे as such मिले नहीं हैं. So I'm Apurva Agarwal. I completed my schooling from Amity International School, post which I went to DTU for my mechanical engineering, and then I followed the most cliched path by doing an MBA. So I did my MBA from NITI Mumbai in supply chain management, and now I'm joining C8 Tires as a supply chain manager. So that is about me. If you could tell me something about you, or how is it going with you?
Yes. First of all, I'm a psychologist. That I would just like to clear that out already, and I think we'll get into the differences of it a little later. Specifically, there are different kinds of psychologists, and the one that I am is a counseling psychologist.
Okay.
So I completed my bachelor's from Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi University. I went ahead and did my master's from Christ University, Bangalore. Graduated during the pandemic. So during the course of my training, I also started working as a school counselor in Bangalore itself. So I have I'm a certified school counselor. I'm right now advancing my training to be a certified movement therapy facilitator.
Okay.
I also hold a foundational level certification in career counseling. Recently, it's going to be a year, by the way, since I started my own practice by the name of Catharsis Counseling. 1st July is when we complete a whole entire year.
Okay.
And I founded Catharsis as a private practice, but over the year we've been able to grow and expand very decently. So we have another therapist on board. We have a group of interns who manage research and social media content. And that's where Catharsis is right now. We've also been able to hold a few group sessions, therapeutic sessions and group webinars in the past. And yeah, in my private practice, I'm seeing, usually I find myself working with young adults, but I'm very comfortable working with adolescents and young adults more than I am with other age groups, I would say.
Okay. So I'll start with a fairly simple question, simple or a basic question, as in, because I feel still psychology as a subject, you will correct me if I'm wrong, is psychology as a subject still being frowned upon, or it's not a subject that is so heavily taken? Is it true or is it not? Like science and engineering and commerce, CA, is psychology being approached with the same intensity as the other subjects, or what's the case?
I would say it's at a very nascent stage, but it's exponentially growing every year. Every year, the number of seats that you see in DU for psychology keep increasing. Every year, more schools are bringing out psychology curriculums in their 11th and 12th grades. And even for master's programs, new master's programs are being introduced every year in different parts of the country. So I think as a field itself, psychology is at a very nascent stage. And so it's taken some time to come to India, then to get indigenized. We had Indian psychology has had its own history itself.
Yeah.
So I would say, the stigma it still exists. It definitely still exists. But I think the stigma has more to do with consulting a psychologist and going to a therapist for myself, for my friends and family, as opposed to being a psychologist and being a therapist myself. I think that is very, in fact, I would say quite heavily promoted because the industry is, booming. The industry, there in a lot of different ways, people have started seeing how important mental health is.
Yeah.
And I think that is why a lot of people have started taking up psychology. I'm seeing a lot of juniors contact me, a lot of, even my peers who wanted to make the switch from engineering or from, a commerce background to go about and be a therapist now. So yeah, I would say it's at a very nascent stage, but I see the change happening very, very rapidly.
what do you think is the reason why people are so cognizant about their mental health these days, which is eventually leading to a boom in the field?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think was the breaking point that when people realized, okay, that we actually need to increase the seats in DU because psychology is needed, mental health is an important issue? What do you think was where did this happen?
Mhm. I think since the early 2000s, the youth has, especially in India, I'm talking about India right now, the youth has become very, very vocal. Earlier, and it was also because we were still, I'm not saying that we're a developed nation now, we're also still developing, but I think as a society, it's come like, as a society we develop, right? We go through different stages. So first we industrialize, we sort of look at how to earn our bread and butter, how to make sure that all citizens are getting, their basic
Maslow.
biological needs. Yes, Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah.
Similarly, so if you're familiar with it, that's how we think of Maslow's in as an individual, right? But
Right.
even as a collectivistic culture, we go through the same steps.
Right.
So once we've sat, you'll see this sort of progression. It always comes to social sciences a little later, because once we've developed our natural sciences, once we've developed the hard life sciences, then we can come to social sciences, the society, the culture, how it impacts our behavior, and look at things like that. Apart from that, I think social media has had to play a huge role in this mental health wave that especially came last year.
Right.
It has also been in some ways very detrimental to the progression of the mental health field in a structured way, in a regulated way. But I would say that there's this sort of a community that we've formed online, virtually, where we find some sort of respite in talking about our issues, especially mental health issues, which we do not find the space for in our homes.
Right.
Uh, so I think social media has had to play a huge role. Uh, I've seen a lot of people consider therapy from just a post that they looked at, or a friend giving a recommendation on social media, or an influencer giving a recommendation on social media. I've had a lot of people change their minds about therapy from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are some of the reasons that I can think of at the top of my head.
All right. So you talked about uh, how big a role social media is playing to actually help people on the platforms to go for therapy, and the kind of data and information awareness, I would say, that is being generated on the platforms. But don't you think, obviously it's part of a debate, but I just want to know what's your opinion, कि don't you think कि social media ही पहला trigger था,
Mm.
because it's sort of a place where everyone is portraying themselves as their perfect selves. So
Mm.
firstly, it's sort of creating a FOMO for me कि मैं वो काम नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ या मैं वो काम नहीं कर पा रही हूँ, or I don't look a certain way, I'm not beautiful a certain way जो society dictate करती है. So that sort of suppresses my emotions as to how I want to express it,
Yeah.
right? Don't you think that social media was actually the trigger for that? And then obviously you're saying कि हाँ, social media की वजह से there is a boom and there's this whole awareness, but it's like a एक ही coin के दो sides.
I think I completely agree with you, Apur. I would say social media is but one aspect of how capitalism has itself led to a range of mental health issues. Even before social media, there were beauty products being sold to us saying this is the perfect body image, or how media looks at only one kind of relationship between a heterosexual man and a woman. That's the only relationship that exists, right? So, I would say capitalism in itself is the idea of it selling us happiness, right? And you will be happy when you buy our products. So social media, I would say, is just one leg of that. But I do agree with you, because at this point, all of us are consumers of social media, right? We might not be consumers of beauty products or a certain kind of TV show or a movie, but all of us are consuming social media, be it in any way, even if we're not on Instagram, which is highly unlikely in this day and age, but
Right.
we're either on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, even WhatsApp to some extent, right?
Yeah.
So I think I agree with you there. I'm not sure if I can give it the term of being the only
Only.
trigger,
Hmm.
but I would say that it has both exacerbated and given some sort of respite to all our mental health concerns.
Right. That's true. All right. So, okay. So now let's just go into a bit of technicality.
Hmm.
All right. So, what my first question is, what exactly is an emotion?
Hmm.
Okay. So basically, what we say is कि I'm feeling this way. Okay.
Hmm.
So, is that emotion a result of something that is changing in our environment, or is that emotion something that is just generated within ourselves by our own thinking? Like,
Hmm.
is it triggered by the environment, the external factors, or is an emotion a result of just our internal well-being?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, Let me turn that around for you because I think the answer lies in your question in itself. If
Okay.
you could think of the last time you felt an extreme emotion or an emotion to quite a bit of an intensity, what would you say? Where was the trigger or where were the sources of these emotions?
I would say today only, as I just met a very close friend of mine, and I met her after 2 months. So I
Mhm.
just felt an immense amount of adoration and love. So I guess
Hmm.
that today was the time, the
Hmm.
recent times when I felt an intense amount of emotion.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right, right. So where do you see the source of this emotion coming from? Is it, would you say it's coming from the external world or the inner world?
Well, it's obviously the external world in this case. Okay.
Hmm. But what about if you were to meet anybody else, would you have the same kind of emotion?
Not necessarily.
Mm, right. So perhaps it's also got something to do with how internally I feel about this person. What are my thoughts about this relationship? What are my values? Do I, as a person, as a human being, value connection in the first place?
Right.
Do I value this relationship in the first place? So I think in that question that you asked very beautifully, that is the definition of emotions in itself.
Okay.
It's an integrated response to external and internal stimuli.
Wow.
So it could either be from our external worlds or be from our internal worlds itself. Sometimes we're just sitting, not doing anything, but a certain memory comes up in our head or a certain thought gets seeded in our head. And even that leads to emotions, right? If I'm thinking of, say, a time when I felt I could step out of the house, which I can't anymore as easily, perhaps I feel a little sad. So that's my internal world leading to an emotion
Right.
versus just the simple fact that I can't step out anymore because of the pandemic, how the virus makes me feel. That is my external world triggering some emotions in me. So
Right.
it is a combination of both at all times.
Right. And where do you think that a psychologist like you steps in this whole scenario when there is such a flush of emotions in us? Where
Mhm.
do you think a psychologist should step in?
Um, when you say where, very interestingly, I was having this conversation with a friend yesterday, and we were talking. She's also a therapist, and we were both talking about how a therapist's job really is to help our inner selves attune to the outer world.
Okay.
Right? So, say for example, during the pandemic, we've had a lot of people come to us talk about how they're grieving, how they're really angry, that they, cannot do the things that they wish to do, how they're in mourning, they feel helpless. It's really intense and very varying emotions that came up for them. And throughout the narrative that we've been taught to believe, we've been served on a platter, is that emotions are not good for us. So
Right.
anger is not good.
Good for us.
And especially, emotions which are a little difficult to manage for our our own selves or the people around us. Even the people around us don't know what to do if I get angry or if I get sad. So the immediate response is, don't get angry. रोते नहीं हैं, गुस्सा नहीं करते, and it gets taught to us in a very subtle way, saying good kids don't cry, good people don't get angry, right? So we were just talking about this, and I realized that there are certain theories, there are certain models which talk about how important emotions are for us, no matter how difficult, no matter how challenging they might be. So happiness is the most pleasurable emotion, but
Okay.
that might not be the emotion that we want to feel at all times, right? Because it's not, if I'm feeling happiness when, say, I've experienced loss, then that's perhaps not in tune with my reality.
Right.
Right. So I think a therapist really steps in at the intersection of the inner and outer world, where we're really trying to attune yourself. So to all my clients, I've been telling them that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal. Right? So you showing intense grief, you showing intense anger is very, very normal right now. In fact, it's very required, because if we don't express it right now, it gets stored in our bodies, and then there's a set of theories for that as well. But really what we need to do is express it at the moment in ways which are adaptive. I'm
Right.
not saying if you're feeling very angry, go around throw things, but can I acknowledge my anger and then address it in a way which is more healthy for my environment, for myself.
How do I put a finger that the emotion that I'm feeling right now is an emotion, it's a pleasurable emotion, like it's happiness, or is it anxiety? Because I have no idea how anxiety feels. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea about that. Or is it anger, or is it just frustration, or is it just that I am physically tired? That's why I'm just feeling a bit lethargic and I don't want to talk to anyone right now.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I put a finger on a particular emotion that what I'm feeling right now?
So one thing that you also highlighted in your question is how our body gives us cues sometimes of our feelings, and that can get very tricky because our autonomic nervous system acts in similar ways in different emotions.
Right.
So our heartbeat rises up even in anger, and even in love,
Right.
and even in anxiety, right? So if my bodily, my physiological, my biological cues are all I have, then perhaps it might get very difficult for me to make sense of my emotions. But luckily, we also have other sources that we can look, we can turn to. And really in therapy, what we do is we do it in a very methodical way. So almost like, when we do research, we collect data and then we try to make sense of that data. In a very similar way, we collect data in therapy as well. So we'll see, if today, by the end of the day, I went to sleep feeling a certain way,
Right.
what are some of the things that happened throughout the day? And then over the course of time, we look at patterns. Are there certain people that I'm feeling this emotion around very frequently? Are there certain situations that make me feel this way? Right? And we go and we dig deeper into what is it about this person, this relationship, this context, this physical context, or even like a virtual context these days, that triggers those emotions in me.
Yeah.
We take it step by step, go deeper in therapy, and then explore these emotions that way.
Right. So one thing you talked about just now was the connection between body and mind. Yeah, but so basically कि मुझे जब डर लगा तो मेरे माइंड ने मेरे हार्ट बीट को रेज किया. Basically my mind instructed my body to react a certain way.
Right.
But can, with movements like with dance or with exercise, can my body actually send a response to the mind कि ठीक है, calm the fuck down?
Yeah, definitely. I think what you're bringing out is a very, very well researched technique. It's for phobias, especially because you're talking about fear. So it's called exposure therapy, in vivo exposure therapy. And what we really do in that is we create a hierarchy of your fears. So if I'm scared of snakes, for example. So the hierarchy would look, and it's different for different people, but the hierarchy would look something like, step one is just looking at a picture, just thinking about snakes. Step two would be just looking at a picture of snakes. Step three would be having a snake somewhere far away from me, but in the same room. Right? And so on, we create a gradation, and the last step would be touching the snake. But all throughout, what we do is not, acha snake dekh liya, chalo, ho gaya. Now you've been exposed, now you don't have fear. We use muscle relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, to do the reverse thing, where our body is telling our minds that, it's okay. This is not a dangerous stimulus. It's okay for us to be around them. So we calm our autonomic nervous systems down. We calm our breath. We calm our body to go the other way around. So yes, what you're saying, that also happens. It's very, very much possible also.
So you were talking about how you were pursuing movement therapy, and you are a great dancer, as I've heard from my friends. So could you please tell me how dance really helps the mind and how it helps you as a person?
Yes, definitely. And, before I get into that, I think this is where I would like to establish the distinction between therapeutic dance and dance therapy. And I think that's true for all art forms. Therapeutic art versus art in therapy. These are very different things, which sometimes we get confused in. So therapeutic dance is when, an individual or a group engages in dance, engages in movement, and that movement helps them either feel good, unwind, release their emotions, connect with people. And this engagement could be either as an artist or as audience. Right. So when I perform on stage, it makes me feel really good. It makes me feel like I've released all my emotions. Or when I go to witness a dance performance, it makes me feel a certain way. Maybe it brings out some insights about my own self when I'm looking at a dance drama. Right. So that can be therapeutic dance.
Okay.
Now, dance in therapy is a very, very structured and a very, very, it's grounded in a lot of theory. So a dance therapy session would look very different from a dance class, and it has a lot. So it's founded in movement really, and not dance per se. There is no structured choreography. There is no routine. There is no, you come to the class, the teacher teaches you something, and then you go ahead and do that. It has more to do with your organic body movement. Now, on some days, that movement could just be walking in my space. That could be breath. That movement could be, holding up different objects in my environment and seeing how they make me feel. Looking at different textures, becoming aware of my senses, or even the lack of movement. If, say, we're exploring a certain theme in a session and the client does not want to move, there's resistance to move, then we explore the resistance. We explore what is it about this theme that you don't want to move for. So really, movement therapy or dance therapy in that way is much more structured. There are goals, and therapeutic dance is something that we engage in for the purpose of the art. So I like to dance, or I like to watch dance. That's why I do it. But here, the purposes are very, very different.
Okay. Moving forward to the part wherein you are saying you are trying to explore how a person is feeling, you're trying to see how is reacting to a certain way of the therapy. So I was reading this book. It's by a psychiatrist, Daniel Amen. He's been a person I've been following for a really long time. So basically, what he says is that that any doctor, whenever he's giving out a prescription, he actually looks at the body part. If it's a cardiovascular surgeon, he looks at the heart, or there are people who take X-rays of the body and then they give out the prescription. But when it comes to the brain, the therapist or the psychologist, they actually just hear the symptoms from the patient, and based on that, they prescribe a medicine. So how effective do you think that is in this case, in your case as a therapist?
Right. I would like to clear out that because I'm a counseling psychologist, I am not, so only psychiatrists can prescribe medicines. Neither, no kind of psychologist can prescribe medicines at all. It's only psychiatrists. So I don't think it's fair for me to comment on that. But I can, if you want, to definitely talk about how people bringing in their symptoms, how we sort of try to explore them or resolve them in very conventional talk uh, sort of formats.
Right. Okay. When we were talking earlier, you talked about how how you don't call these prescriptions, you call them challenges.
Hmm.
So I think you said something about not calling them prescriptions, but challenges or a homework for
Hmm.
patients.
Hmm. Hmm.
What,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think the prescriptions, yeah, we can call them challenges or homework as well. But yes, I agree with you. We use a lot of tools. I think
Okay.
I would like to call them tools, but those prescriptions, again, they're very different in, how a doctor prescribes medicines, because the doctor in that relationship is an expert.
Hmm.
The doctor knows what's best for your heart. But in a therapeutic session, the underlying assumption is that the expert is the client themselves. So we use a lot of different tools. We use a lot of different worksheets. We call them thought experiments. We give them prompts that we want them to think about or reflect on
Right.
during the week before we meet them next. But it's really for them to take it from there.
Right.
I can give them a worksheet which will be very loosely structured, and then it's for them to explore what are the different things that they want to do with that worksheet. Or I could leave them with a prompt. I personally, because I'm very inclined to the creative arts, I give the people that I work with the freedom to do whatever they want with the prompt. So if I give them a prompt for a week, they can think about it, write about it, dance it out, write, click pictures or find pictures on the internet that they think resonate with that theme. So those are the different ways in which we I don't want to say prescribe, but use different tools and techniques.
Yeah. Okay. So are these tools or are these prescriptions, I'm sorry to use that word again, is it just based on the patient or a particular individual, or is the therapy session sometimes also a group therapy, wherein there are multiple patients or multiple clients with you? Is there a group therapy sort of a thing as well?
Yes, there's definitely group therapy. One thing that I would like to say is that, uh, something that can help us understand this idea of prescriptions or what treatment looks like is that, there are different schools of thought, different approaches in psychology. And I'm not sure if that is something that you're aware of. So, biomedical approach is one of them,
Okay.
which is what a psychiatrist follows. So they look at your biological symptoms and they treat them at a biological level through medicines.
Hmm.
Then there is a cognitive model, which looks at your thoughts,
Hmm.
and then the treatment is very thought oriented.
Hmm.
So you'll explore your thoughts, you'll explore your beliefs, attitudes, values.
Hmm.
There is then an emotion focused therapy. So there are different kinds of, there's behavioral, there's humanistic, there's existential, different kinds of thoughts, schools of thoughts. And each therapist, either inclines to one school of thought in particular, and then that school of thought informs treatment.
Okay.
So, if I'm, say, a psychoanalytic uh, therapist, then treatment for me would look very different from what a CBT practitioner's treatment would look like.
Okay.
So that is one thing that I would like to sort of mention. And about group therapy, yes, definitely. Group therapy is also something that definitely exists. And there are different sort of themes that group therapy has been very well researched to work with,
Right.
uh, especially when we require support. So grief or substance abuse, these kinds of things, group therapy works brilliantly with. Or ideas of loneliness, things of connection, isolation. These are things that group therapy works brilliantly with. Um, yeah.
Okay. I have a, I would say an interesting question.
Mhm.
So before I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. What are your thoughts on spirituality, Soumya?
My personal thoughts.
Yeah, your personal thoughts.
Yeah. Personally, I would consider myself to be a spiritual person.
Okay.
I do believe in, you know, for lack of better term, I'm saying energies, but I do believe in the metaphysical, and I think I myself have experienced that a lot as a dancer. And I think because religion is something that I find very formally structured, spirituality I feel like gives me that respite to let loose and explore for myself how I would like.
Right.
So I would say I am inclined towards it. I am a believer. Not sure if I can call myself an advocate,
Yeah.
but yes, I do see some merit in being a spiritual individual. Yeah.
So if a person, for example, if they identify themselves as atheist and they say there is no such thing as a religion and I don't believe in spirituality. So firstly, as a person, because you believe in spirituality and then again you're a therapist as well, do you recommend the person to go on a path of spirituality? Do you want them to explore that? Do you suggest to explore spirituality to a patient?
Absolutely not. That is something that I would never do. One thing that, the first thing I remember in my master's training, that coordinator, the course coordinator, she steps into the room and she just says one thing to us. Two things actually. She says that if you've come to this program thinking that you're going to make big bucks, this is your time to leave. And if you've come to this profession thinking that you're going to heal people with what has healed you, then you need to spend a lot of time unlearning that. And I think that is very, very powerful, very, very useful. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier, which is that for us, the expert is the client itself. I want to give back the agency that the client has lost perhaps to them.
Right.
So if for them, and there's a parallel personal process happening for me as well. So throughout our master's training, we've been able to sort of learn how to be very reflective in our work with clients as well. So constantly, I am a part of their world, but I'm also reflecting on how stepping into their world makes me personally feel.
Right.
And if a client that I think holds a set of values which are starkly different from my set of values, and I think that it's going to get very difficult for me to work with them because my subjective bias is going to creep in, then I'm perhaps going to refer them to another therapist that I know aligns with similar ideals.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of reflective work, which is why we're constantly in our own therapy, in our own supervision, we're discussing how our clients make us feel. And using those emotions to make sense of our own inner world as well.
So how do you guys cope up when there is a client and he is suffering from an emotional trauma, and it sort of affects the person who is listening to the client as well? So how do you deal after that session or after talking to the client?
Right. So the term for what you said is vicarious trauma, vicarious grief, vicarious even happiness, anything, or secondary trauma, secondary grief. It's when and it does not just happen. In the pandemic, we saw firsthand how my friend grieving made me grieve, right? Or my friend being angry makes me angry about their anger. So this is something that a lot of us experience generally, but therapists experience on a very daily, day-to-day basis. And I think, again, all of us have different things that work for each of us. Something that works for me, and I'm very, very grateful for, is a very strong network, a very strong connection that I have with my friends, family, and my colleagues. So a lot of my friends are also therapists themselves. So I can, they get what I'm going through. So if I'm not a 100% in my relationships with them, they understand. And, similar expectations is what they have from me as well.
Right.
It's taken, I think, some time for my family also to adjust to my own, styles of working, styles of communicating, because I also moved in after my master's got over, moved in back home. And I think those 2 years have been very, very transformative for me. So it has taken some time for the people around me to get used to it, but I think I've been able to communicate my needs coherently as of now. Apart from that, like I mentioned, it's very, very important. Like it's almost like our job description for us to be in therapy and supervision at all times.
Right.
So it's very important for us to, because we're holding space, we're holding such intense emotions for other people. We need to find that at least an hour in 1 week or 2 weeks where somebody else holds them for us. Apart from that, you already mentioned, I really enjoy movement. So I find joy, I find some sort of anchoring in movement. I've recently also taken up to art, and I just like to paint, sometimes when I don't want to talk about my emotions, sit with them, just want to keep them away for a while. I'll perhaps paint a little or dance a little. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Moving on to the second part of the discussion, which is about intense emotion.
Right.
So we were discussing that we will be talking about anxiety and PTSD in the session. So what exactly is anxiety if we just dive right into it?
Right. Again, I would like to say that both anxiety and PTSD as disorders is something that I am not, authorized. I don't see myself qualified enough to be talking about them as disorders. So anxiety as an emotion, anxiety as an experience is something that I can talk about. And for PTSD, again, I would say it's a disorder. So how we ourselves have trauma-informed lenses in our own therapy sessions is something that I can talk about. But when it comes to, the different ways in which these diagnoses manifest and how there's a prognosis to them, that is not perhaps something that I think I can be talking about. A clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist would be the best fit for those.
Okay. So what exactly is anxiety as an emotion? Like how do I say that I am feeling anxious right now?
Right. I think anxiety is one of those emotions which manifests very, very quickly and very significantly for most of us, not all of us, in the body. Again, the combination of symptoms is very different for different people. But mostly what I've seen for myself, for the people around me, it has to do with very physical restlessness. There's either shivering of the limbs, shivering of my extremes, extreme pacing of heartbeat, and breathlessness, sweating. These are some of the physiological symptoms that I can think of. Sometimes people even feel like, things around them are closing up. They feel really warm, can't breathe. And so they feel like, things around them are closing up. There's not enough space. So these are some physiological symptoms. There is an amount of worry, extreme worry. And in most cases, there is a lot of jumping from one thought to another. A lot of, monkey-mindedness is what we call it.
Yeah.
So these are some of the symptoms of anxiety that that I have observed from myself, from the people around me.
And is it uncertainty in our surroundings that triggers anxiety? If you're uncertain.
Yeah, that can be one of the triggers. That is a very common trigger, but it can even be, a very, even if sometimes you feel anxious of things that are very, very predicted. right? So sometimes in our heads, I feel certain that I will not be able to write this exam the way I want, and I feel anxious, right? So there's not really an amount of uncertainty there. In fact, there is an amount of extreme rigidity, which is the exact opposite in my thoughts.
Right.
So I would say uncertainty is, and that is especially something that a lot of us have experienced over the past year. Uncertainty for our futures, for what the family dynamics are going to change like, for when am I going to step out, for what my health is going to look like next day from now. So we have experienced anxiety triggered by uncertainty more often than other kinds of anxieties. But I would say that, there are different triggers as well.
Okay. And what is the correct sort of a way to treat anxiety on a personal level? Like, is what I read was like you can do meditation, you can just do deep breathing, and then you can go out for a walk or something, or like what is my spectrum when I have to deal with anxiety?
Right. I think the spectrum again of treatments or treatment modalities depends on the intensity of anxiety. So I would say, there is like a list of characteristics that make it a diagnosis or disorder. So if it's that, then you need to be in psychotherapy. You perhaps need to be prescribed some medicines as well. But if it's not that, coming to intense anxiety as an emotion, right? For that, I think something that even you mentioned, meditation, deep breathing, what we're really doing in that is calming our bodies to calm our minds. Go the top-down approach for that. So one thing that has been very well researched, very evidence-based, and works wonderfully with anxiety is working with our senses. So engaging my five senses in different ways when I have an anxiety attack or when I'm feeling very, very anxious, I found that to help a lot of people, personally myself as well. And so you can be creative with it. Like there's a very common myth that would be, the 5 4 3 2 1 technique. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but that is the okay. So it's basically with your deep breaths, what you do is you inhale, exhale deeply, and then you just notice the 5 things in your surrounding that you can see.
Okay.
And with each you breathe, then 4 things in your surrounding that you can hear. Again, with each you breathe. 3 things in your surrounding that you can perhaps touch, right? 2 things in your surrounding that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Is my taste buds, are they metallic right now, are they sour, are they dehydrated, right? So these are some of the things that's the 5 4 3 2 1 technique, and throughout we breathe. So this is something that we teach our clients who struggle with anxiety, but there are also very creative ways in which you yourself can see how I can engage my 5 senses. Like for me personally, something that really helps is ice. So ice, barf. So I find that to be very calming, and in that I'm engaging my sense of touch. Right. So I take ice and I just roll it, especially on my wrists, at the back of my ears, at the nape of my neck. And that really, really helps me. I've suggested to a few people and they found it very helpful as well.
How did you get to know about it? Sorry to
I read about it somewhere. I've seen a few posts also of people doing it. And to me, initially it felt very absurd, but I tried it and I think it was very calming, which is also why, sometimes people suggest skincare for self-care or skincare for relieving yourself, but that's done, in a very mundane level. So if we do it consciously, it might sort of, lead to some sort of relief. But what I'm really trying to say here is that different things work for different people. So we really, at an individual level, we can create our own sort of kit. Some people like to listen to ambient music, white noise, or certain kinds of elements. Maybe I only like to listen to fire sounds when I'm feeling anxious. or just rain sounds. And thank God for Spotify and YouTube. These are very easily accessible to us, right? So these are a few techniques of, engaging with our senses. A very long-term technique is, when meditation steps into the place. So mindfulness meditation is something that has been very well researched, very frequently prescribed, and has shown the best results for anxiety. And again, mindfulness meditation is when, how I talked about monkey mindedness. So we try to just observe the thoughts that my mind is going to, the different thoughts, and just not stopping them, just observing and then letting that be. So yeah, I think mindfulness meditation is a skill really, and a lot of people these days do not have the patience to engage in that. But I personally see a lot of merit in meditation, given that it's done consciously.
Right. All right. So if I have to just summarize the conversation that we have had until now, I guess we have talked in 4 different verticals. One would be biological, wherein we were talking about how our health and body affects our mind, and how by working on our body we can basically have a happier mind. The second would be, correct me if I'm wrong, the second would be psychological, wherein we talked about the kind of internal emotions that we have, and we can just talk back to these emotions to actually treat them. Then again, meditation comes into picture to make us more cognizant and aware of these emotions. So that would be the part of psychological. The third would be social, wherein you talked about group therapy. You talked about talking about your emotions to people, and the role of social media and how it has made us more aware of our emotions, and that there is a solution, there is a support present out there. And I guess the last part would be spiritual, which is again a bit debatable because some people believe it and some people don't. So is there something else that you would like to add in any of these 4 verticals, or if somewhere I said something wrong, do you want me to correct on that?
I wouldn't say it's something that was wrong really, but something that you said, when you were talking about the biological aspect, was how we can attune ourselves to our body to make ourselves feel more happy, or uh, and I personally have a bit of a problem with that narrative, because like I started this discussion talking about how we've been taught to seek happiness, pursue happiness, but all our other emotions are also very, very important data. And if you look at them from an evolutionary perspective, there's a reason why fear exists, right? We would have all died if we weren't scared of the coronavirus pandemic. Or there's a reason why anger exists. If there was no anger, then perhaps feminism as a movement wouldn't have existed. The LGBTQIA as a movement wouldn't have existed, right? So these emotions that we really call unhealthy or negative, I look at them personally as very important data. And a lot of work has been done in this field as well. Susan David is a very, very popular scholar, and she's written extensively about how emotions can be used as data, and how we can channelize them. Our unpleasurable or our difficult emotions, is how she calls them, instead of negative emotions, into actions which are more appropriate. So, and I think that makes life a lot more easier as well, because then we're not constantly, looking for things that make me happy, people that make me happy, activities or events that make me happy, achievements that make me happy. It's more about, okay, all right, I'm feeling sad, and this is why I'm feeling sad. And then what can I do about it?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Soumya, as we just move towards the end of our conversation, I would just like to ask you, what are the 2, 3 things that you would suggest anyone to incorporate in their daily lives to actually be, to actually have a better expression, better emotion, and to, okay, should I say to actually be more happy, or should I say be more emotionally aware?
I would say emotionally aware is a better term. Um, So I think one thing that I always talk about is awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance of our emotions, the 3 A's, which is sort of in line with what I was talking about earlier about how, all our emotions are data. They're not directives, or they're not, calls for action. They're just data for us to sit and think about. So I think having a very reflective approach really helps in being emotionally more aware. So taking some time to acknowledge, this is how I feel. First become aware of, this is how I feel. And in that, we talked about how our external sources, internal sources act as data to tell us what it is that I really feel. Then acknowledge it. Okay, don't don't brush it away. Don't नहीं चलता है, इस बात पे थोड़ी गुस्सा होते हैं, और ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है कि मैं इतनी छोटी सी बात पे गुस्सा हो रही हूँ. No, let's acknowledge that I feel this emotion, and rid myself of all judgments at that time. And then the third is accepting that I feel the way I do.
Right.
And once we've done these 3, I think that's where we can go a level deeper and see what are the values that my emotions are pointing at. If I'm feeling sad that my mom shouted at me, then I've accepted that I feel sad when my mom shouts at me, then I can go a level deeper and see, perhaps that tells me that I really value the relationship that I have with my mom.
Right.
Or maybe it tells me I really value how my mom sees me. I want her to think I'm competent, right? So, just really seeing what are the narratives that we've built for ourselves through these emotions. And it can get very difficult to do it all by ourselves. So go for therapy, find yourself a therapist, or talk about these with your peers. Talk about your emotions, obviously, if you feel safe enough in these spaces, with the people around you, and see how they react. Sometimes we just think that, they're going to lash out, or they're not going to be able to accept them. But quite often, that might not be the case.
Right.